On November 5, 2009, a mass shooting took place at Fort Hood, near Killeen, Texas. Nidal Hasan, a U.S. Army major and psychiatrist, fatally shot 13 people, and injured more than 30 others. The shooting produced more casualties than any other on an American military base. Several individuals, including Senator Jolie Berman, General Barry McCaffrey, President Barack Obama and others have called the event a terrorist attack. The United States Department of Defense and federal law enforcement agencies had classified the shootings as an act of workplace violence. This was changed by the fiscal year 2015 National Defense Authorization Act, which broadened the criteria for awarding the Purple Heart to include an attack by a foreign terrorist organization, if the attack was inspired or motivated by the foreign terrorist organization. This allowed the Army to award the Purple Heart, and its civilian equivalent, the Defense of Freedom Medal, to victims of the attack. Hasan was shot and as a result is paralyzed from the waist down. Hasan was arraigned by a military court on July 20, 2011 and was charged with 13 counts of premeditated murder and 32 counts of attempted murder under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. His court-martial began on August 7, 2013. Due to the nature of the charges, Hasan faced either the death penalty or life in prison without parole upon conviction. Hasan was found guilty on all 13 counts of premeditated murder and 32 counts of attempted premeditated murder on August 23, 2013, and was sentenced to death on August 28, 2013. Days after the shooting, reports in the media revealed that a joint terrorism task force had been aware of a series of emails between Hasan and the Yemen-based Imam Anwar al-Awlaki, who had been monitored by the NSA as a security threat, and that Hasan's colleagues had been aware of his increasing radicalization for several years. The failure to prevent the shootings led the Defense Department and the FBI to commission investigations, and Congress to hold hearings. The U.S. government declined requests from survivors and family members of the slain to categorize the Fort Hood shooting as an act of terrorism, or motivated by militant Islamic religious convictions. In November 2011, a group of survivors and family members filed a lawsuit against the government for negligence in preventing the attack, and to force the government to classify the shootings as terrorism. The Pentagon argued that charging Hasan with terrorism was not possible within the military justice system and that such action could harm the military prosecutor's ability to sustain a guilty verdict against Hasan. Shootings preparations. According to pre-trial testimony, Hasan entered the Guns Galore store in Killeen on July 31, 2009, and purchased the FN-57 semi-automatic pistol that he was to use in the attack at Fort Hood. According to Army Specialist William Gilbert, a regular customer at the store, Hasan entered the store and asked for the most technologically advanced weapon on the market and the one with the highest standard magazine capacity. Hasan was allegedly asked how he intended to use the weapon, but simply repeated that he wanted the most advanced handgun with the largest magazine capacity. The three people with Hasan, Gilbert, the store manager, and an employee, all recommended the FN-57 pistol. As Gilbert owned one of the pistols, he spent an hour describing its operation to Hasan. Hasan left the store, saying he needed to research the weapon. He returned to purchase the gun the next day, and visited the store once a week to buy extra magazines, along with over 3,000 rounds of 5.7 x 28 mm SS-192 and SS-197 SR ammunition total. In the weeks prior to the attack, Hasan visited an outdoor shooting range in Florence, where he allegedly became adept at hitting silhouette targets at distances of up to 100 yards. Soldier Readiness Processing Center shootings at approximately 1:34 p.m. local time, November 5, 2009. Hasan entered his workplace, the Soldier Readiness Processing Center, where personnel receive routine medical treatment immediately prior to and on return from deployment. He was armed with the FN-57 pistol, which he had fitted with 2 Laser Max laser sights, one red and one green. A Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver was later found on Hasan's person, but he did not use it to shoot any of the victims. According to eyewitnesses, Hasan had taken a seat at an empty table and bowed his head for several seconds when he suddenly stood up, shouted, "Allahu Akbar," and opened fire. Witnesses said Hasan initially sprayed bullets at soldiers in a fan-like motion, before taking aim at individual soldiers. Eyewitness Sergeant Michael Davis said, "The rate of fire was pretty much constant shooting. When I initially heard it, it sounded like an M16. Army Reserve Captain John Gaffney tried to stop Hasan by charging him, but was mortally wounded before reaching him." Civilian physician assistant Michael Cahill also tried to charge Hasan with a chair, but was shot and killed. Army Reserve Specialist Logan Burnett tried to stop Hasan by throwing a folding table at him, but he was shot in the left hip, fell down, and crawled to a nearby cubicle. According to testimony from witnesses, Hasan passed up several opportunities to shoot civilians, and instead targeted soldiers in uniform, who, in accordance with military policy, were not carrying personal firearms. At one point, Hasan reportedly approached a group of 5 civilians hiding under a desk. He looked at them, swept the dot of his pistol's laser sight over one of the men's faces, and turned away without firing. Base Civilian Police Sergeant Kimberly Munley, who had rushed to the scene in her patrol car, encountered Hasan in the area outside the Soldier Readiness Processing Center. Hasan fired at Munley, who exchanged shots with him using her 9mm M9 pistol. Munley's hand was hit by shrapnel when one of Hasan's bullets struck a nearby rain gutter, and then 2 bullets struck Munley. The first bullet hit her thigh, and the second hit her knee. As she began to fall from the first bullet, the second bullet struck her femur, shattering it and knocking her to the ground. Hasan walked up to Munley and kicked her pistol out of reach. As the shooting continued outside, nurses and medics entered the building, secured the doors with a belt and rushed to help the wounded. According to the responding nurses, there was so much blood covering the floor inside the building, that they were unable to maintain balance, and had difficulty reaching the wounded to help them. In the area outside the building, Hasan continued to shoot at fleeing soldiers, and Civilian Police Sergeant Mark Todd arrived and shouted commands at Hasan to surrender. Todd said, "Then he turned and fired a couple of rounds at me. I didn't hear him say a word, he just turned and fired." The 2 exchanged shots, and Hasan was felled by 5 shots from Todd, who kicked the pistol out of his hand and put handcuffs on him as he fell unconscious. Aftermath. An investigator later testified that 146 spent shell casings were recovered inside the building. Another 68 casings were collected outside, for a total of 214 rounds fired by the attacker and responding police officers. A medic who treated Hasan said his pockets were full of pistol magazines. When the shooting ended, he was still carrying 177 rounds of unfired ammunition in his pockets, contained in both 20 and 30-round magazines. The incident, which lasted about 10 minutes, resulted in 13 killed, 12 soldiers and 1 civilian. 11 died at the scene, and 2 died later in a hospital, and 30 people wounded. Initially, officials thought 3 soldiers were involved in the shooting. 2 other soldiers were detained, but subsequently released. The Fort Hood website posted a notice indicating that the shooting was not a drill. Immediately after the shooting, the base and surrounding areas were locked down by military police and U.S. Army Criminal Investigation Command until around 7 p.m. local time. In addition, Texas Rangers, Texas DPS troopers, deputies from the Bell County Sheriff's Office, and FBI agents from Austin and Waco were dispatched to the base. U.S. President Barack Obama was briefed on the incident and later made a statement about the shooting. On November 5, 2010, 1 year later, 52 individuals received awards for their actions in the shooting. The Soldier's Medal was awarded posthumously to Captain John Gaffney, who died trying to charge the shooter. 50 other medals were presented to other responders, including 7 others who were awarded the Soldier's Medal. The Secretary of the Army Award for Valor was awarded to police officers Kimberly Munley and Mark Todd, for the roles they played in stopping the shooter. On May 23, 2011, the Army Award for Valor was posthumously awarded to the civilian physician assistant Michael Cahill, who died trying to charge the shooter with a chair. In May 2012, Senator Joe Lieberman and Representative Peter T. King proposed legislation that would make the victims of the shooting eligible for the Purple Heart. In the 113th Congress, Representative John Carter introduced legislation to change the shooting designation from workplace violence to combat-related, which would make the victims of the shooting eligible to receive full benefits and the Purple Heart. In July 2014, a memorial for those killed during the attack began to be built in Killeen. On February 6, 2015, the Department of Defense issued a press release, in which United States Secretary of the Army John M. McHugh announced that he was approving the awarding of the Purple Heart and its civilian counterpart, the Secretary of Defense Medal for the Defense of Freedom, to victims of the shooting. This is a result of Congress expanding the eligibility requirement under a provision of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2015. On April 10, 2015, nearly 50 awards were handed out to dozens of survivors. Casualties: 13 people were slain in the attack. Over 30 people were wounded, some from gunshots, others from falls or other injuries incurred during the incident, and many suffered psychological trauma or shock. The Army, press, and investigative bodies have reported several numbers for the total number of injured, without indicating what sorts of injuries they were counting, nor how. 29, 30, 31, 32, 38, and 42. Hasan, the gunman, was taken to Scott and White Memorial Hospital, a trauma center in Temple, Texas, and later moved to Brooke Army Medical Center in San Antonio, Texas, where he was held under heavy guard. Hasan was hit by at least 4 shots. As a result of bullet wounds to his spine, he is now paraplegic. He was later held at the Bell County Jail in Belton, Texas. 10 of the injured were also treated at Scott and White. 7 wounded victims were taken to Metroplex Adventist Hospital in Killeen. 8 others received hospital treatment for shock. On November 20, 2009, it was announced that 8 of the wounded service members would deploy overseas. Fatalities: the 13 killed were gunshot wounds. The following people suffered gunshot wounds and survived.